So after cast shadows, the next kind of shadow is a form shadow. In order to understand a form shadow, I'm going to start us with the shape of a pear. And we want to imagine, in terms of form shadows take place when we have depth, when we have solid forms. We've been working to understand three-dimensional shapes. So that's a cube. And if we have a light direction, we just established in our cast shadow lesson that a light direction, say the light direction is represented by a triangle like this. So this surface is lighter and this surface is darker, and the shadow being cast is over this way. So there's my cast shadow. That's my light side here, and this is my dark side. When you shade with a tool like a pen or a pencil or anything that has a tip on it, it really helps to shade along with the contour. You see how this contour goes this way and this one goes this way? So shading in that direction is really nice. So this gives me light, medium, dark in relationship to the shadow, okay? In relationship to the light direction. So I just shaded against the contour. Why I did that, I don't know. So there we have very, very basic shading, very basic form shading, okay? So now what we're going to do is we're going to apply these same ideas to a little bit more complicated shape. And the shape that I want to work with is a pear. And the pear, underneath it, is like a cylinder, and then the top of it we could consider a cube. But then the cube has a rounded off shape, like the way that we did before. And the cylinder won't be perfect. I'm going to put a cross contour showing the cylinder. So you can see now that the way we're drawing this pear has volume. It's a solid volume, a solid shape. Anytime we're using the word solid, we're using that to, anytime I'm using the word solid, I'm using that to refer to that three-dimensional quality, like what we're getting here. This is a 3D object, and 3D means solid. Okay, so this is now a 3D object. It means solid. So the first thing that happens when you have light and you have a direction of light is you separate the form, and in this case we're separating the form along this line. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to separate the form into a light side and a dark side. Okay, for right now I want you to not deal with that. That would be a halftone. So if the light direction, as we're seeing here, is in this way, okay, so you're going to get, the light is going to cross the contour showing the volume and the shape. And so this side becomes the shadow side and that becomes the light side. And I'm shading it with the contour. I'm shading it to show its volume. Okay? So that is stage one lighting. And it works for everything. We take any solid shape that you can think of, create the cross contour, part of it, half of it dark and half of it light. And that's where shading, form shading begins. Okay, the next step in form shading, we're going to do a 3-step process with form shading, okay? The next step is that sometimes the light will come down, and when it comes down, it'll hit the ground. So this light will come down here. We've learned how to, now that we know if the light direction is coming, here's our ground plane that way. So that teaches us how to, the shape of the cast shadow here. Sometimes when the light comes down, it bounces back up in and you get what's called a reflected light, which will lighten up the inside of the shadow side. So after I've done this, the way that I like to show that is I like to darken the edge of the shadow. See how I'm working with the shape of the contour? I'm using this darkening. Okay, so that's stage 2. And now the next thing that we want to do is, so we've got a reflected light. We've got the light. We've got a darkened edge, which we're going to call the core shadow. This time, when I'm shading cast shadow on the ground, I'm drawing perspective lines to help increase the sense of dimensionality. Okay, and the last piece that we're going to learn is we're going to learn transitioning from here over, the transition from shadow to light. Now, on a cube, when you transition from shadow to light, the transition is really abrupt because the line, the angle of that line is really strong. But here you can imagine that what you have is you have a really soft transition from dark to light because the angle, you see here's a cube. We've got angles like this on the cube. And so when the light comes this way, like at this moment, there's light, and then at the very next instant, there's none. And so it forms a really sharp, hard shadow like that. But on this, because the shape is like this, the light's coming this way, and this way, and this way, and this way, and it's not until some spot place over here, you see the light, it gradually starts to diminish. And this is how we do that. We go to this edge and we very gently turn towards the light. You very gently gradate towards the light in the halftone. So I'm going to do one more little demonstration of this. And I'll just start out with a kind of a pear shape. And I very frequently use the cross contour that comes from the light direction to help establish the form quality. It's like this. It's like there's this great example I saw a teacher, Will Weston, do, which is he shows a square like this. He shows a cube like that. And he says, okay, this is where a cube begins. At this point, this pear is in the status of that cube. And then you give this line. And when that line becomes apparent, now we have volume. And so here's that line with this pear. And that introduces volume. Okay, so I'm going to start by shading the dark side. I want to separate the light from the dark. And I'm free to, I can do this. I can say, imagine that this is living inside of a dark environment, kind of dim or dark environment. So there's not much light out there in the background. The light's not hitting anything. And now I'm just doing a fine darkening. Ballpoint pen is really nice for shading. It allows you to layer marks really nicely. And then charcoal is also so beautiful, and pencil. Those are great mediums for modeling. People that really like to model. That's the drawing word for shading, is modeling, because what you're ending up doing is you're ending up taking the form and creating something more solid out of it, like model making. Okay, so we've separated the light from the dark. And now what I want to do is I'm going to come to this edge, and I'm going to darken just on this edge. And that gives me, by darkening this edge, it creates the effect over here of a core shadow, of reflected light and a core shadow. And then the third stage is to go through and very gently establish halftone where transitions are called for, where the form is turning gently. Okay, there's one more little thing, is a shadow accent. A lot of times there's a phrase you'll start to run into called occlusion, and it's this little area in here where no light can get to at all, and it's between the cast shadow, which in this case will be coming this way, okay. First shading lesson.